One of the least understood messages in Power Pivot is, why am I getting this relationships between tables may be needed message showing up here? Users hate this. I get asked all the time, how can you suppress this permanently? And the answer is, you build your data model correctly and you build your pivot tables correctly and you'll never see that message. But the question is, how do you know what's correct? Now, if you've never taken a dimensional modeling class, I highly recommend either our dimensional modeling class or a self-service business intelligence academy at ScaleWave. We actually have lessons in both that teach you exactly how to suppress this dialogue. But I also have a cool tool in Monkey Tools that allows you to figure this stuff out and make changes. Just keep in mind that the terminology is in it, are terms that we do teach inside our courses. Now, I've got 4 examples of different pivot tables here, a couple that show this message, a couple that don't, but all of them are incorrectly configured, and I'm going to use this feature here called Pivot Sleuth to go and diagnose them and correct them. Now, the first thing I want you to know is that when you bring your Pivot Sleuth up here, if you are in the free mode, what you will have is you will actually have no color and no tooltip text on it. The idea here is that we're showing you the field name, sales, budget, and variance, but we're actually showing you the real field names that come from the data model. This plainly indicates that somebody's changed these on the pivot table, and it's hard to tie them back to where they are supposed to necessarily be, especially if you've got lots of field inside your workbook. Now, in this case here, you'll notice that budgets, we've got here, if I mouse over this one here, you can see that it cannot be filtered by sales category. And this is due to the way that the data model is actually set up and the field choices that have been used on this pivot. There's actually nothing wrong with the data model. It's all about the field choices that have been used here. Notice that variance as well cannot be filtered by sales category. And if we take a look at sales category, it's in red here. It gives us a whole bunch of information. I'm not going to make you read all of it, except to say that this is a foreign key that exists on the sales table. It cannot cross-filter via the categories table, which is where the primary key is, back to the budget table. So what it's essentially telling us in this great big long field of advice here is, if we close this and we take category off the pivot from here, but we put the categories from the category table on the pivot, notice that the yellow message has gone away. And this is because we're using the right field from the right table. And if I hop back into Pivot Sleuth at this point in time, you'll notice that it now gives me a nice clean bill of health. So that is a healthy pivot table. Now, there are some other things that I would prefer to do to this layout, but I'm going to work through the rest of the example so you'll understand how some of these things come into play. So let's take a look at issue number 2. Issue number 2, we've got the same error message coming up here. Now, let me go and hop into Pivot Sleuth and see what it says this time. It says, hey, look, none of these 3 measures here are able to be filtered by what's going on over in this case. Now, I want to be really clear, even though these are sales, budget, and variance, these come from a different table. These were stored on a measures table. The previous ones were stored on the sales and budget table. So the measure names are actually different. Notice that this particular piece here says measures is a disconnected table in the data model. Let's go have a look and see. So we crack the data model open, we go into diagram view. My first pivot table used fields here, L sales, L budget, and L variance, the L standing for local for our fact tables. These ones, D, are coming from my disconnected table, D sales, D budget, D variance. Notice it's a measures table. It has one column that's empty and a whole bunch of measures on it. So let me just go and close this for a second and take a look, and it says again, when we go and mouse over this, it cannot cross-filter against these. And it gives us a little bit more advice as well. Over on this side, it says, look, there's no relationship to that disconnected table. And if you read through all of the advice that's actually in here, what it tells you is do something very, very simple to fix this problem. Close this. We'll go back to the data model, go to diagram view, and we're going to hide every unaggregated column on the table that holds the fact that we're using. We're going to hide this from Client Tools. And just like that, this now will change. If we go and just pop this back a little bit, what you're going to notice before this actually forces its updates through is that the measures table has a table icon. If I now close this and return to Excel, you'll see that that icon now changes to the measurement icon itself. So this is good. And notice also the yellow message went away. That's pretty cool. So if you actually hide every unaggregated column on a table, Number one, people can't use the wrong fields, a fact table field in a dimensional area, which actually led to our previous problem. They also can't create implicit measures, which is a good thing for me. I would prefer that we write explicit measures in order to do the things that we need to do inside Power Pivot. So that's two issues solved with the Pivot Sleuth. If we pop back in there again, look at that, nice clean bill of health, everything looks good. So let's hop up over to issue number 3. We have another pivot table here. Notice there is no relationships between fields may be needed here, but there are problems in this pivot table. How do I know? Well, I can take a look here and it seems that my budget is giving me the grand total here for every single one of these items. Again, grand totals here, grand totals here. This is a symptom of something that's not set up correctly, but it's hard to see if you're not really looking for it. Well, Pivot Sleuth is looking for it. So let's pop in here and take a look. And you can see that we've got a couple of different fields of advice that we've got here. The colors are a little bit different. Because these are stored on a measures table, they will never trip that relationship needed error because we've already fixed it by hiding that unaggregated column. But you'll notice over here, even though those measures are calculated correctly, Power Pivot now thinks you know what you're doing. Sales category over here, it says, look, this is a foreign key. It might work, but it also may not. And we suggest you switch this for the primary key in the other table. In addition, budget year over here says, look, this is coming from a fact table. You shouldn't do this. It may or may not cause problems. So let's go and see if we can fix both of these issues. So we'll close. Well, I don't even need to close this for right now. I can look at this and say, well, hey, budget, this is on columns for year, but I've got year in a dimension table over here. So let's uncheck this one and we'll put year onto our columns. Okay, there we go. Down here we have category. We should be using categories from the category table, so I'm going to uncheck that one and put this one back into the rows area, close the Pivot Sleuth, reopen it, and notice that it now gives us a clean bill of health, and we also don't have those repeating totals showing up in there anymore because we've now got the model set up and configured correctly. All right, we're going to do one more. I'm going to hop over to issue number 4. And you can see in this case, we've got a pivot table. We've got months across the top. We've got our sales dollars down the left. We've got a filter here that we can use to slice. All the numbers appear to be changing. Everything looks good. Over here, we've got a calendar timeline. We can slice. Everything appears to look good. But is it healthy? Today, it's working. But will it in future if I start adding more stuff to the data model or adding more fields? This is a good question. So let's find out what Pivot Sleuth thinks. We'll click in the pivot table, click on Pivot Sleuth, and it says, hey, guess what? We've identified some things may cause problems in future. If we go and look at sales category, it says it's a foreign key, and it says right off the bat, it might work for now, but it's recommended that you switch it out. The same thing is true of sales date. This is a foreign key. What that means is that when we actually go and we take a look at our pivot table here for sales category, we're using the category field from the sales table in our relationship instead of the primary key from categories over here. So let's change this one out. Now, unfortunately, you can't see that date's been used, and that's because it is in a timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete the timeline, go back to my pivot table, and right-click, add as timeline for my calendar table. And you'll notice I can move it up here, change this out. Everything's still going to work exactly as it did before, but now when I go and click on Pivot Sleuth, it says, hey, this is healthy, this is set up, this should expand no problem as your data grows and as your complexity of your models grow. So this is the nice thing here is if you configure everything correctly, you never need to see that relationships may be needed error message. If some of the terms in this sound a little bit weird, foreign keys, primary keys, again, I really recommend you go and take a dimensional modeling course through SkillWave or somewhere else in order to really understand what's going on in here. But the nice thing about this is this tool will give you the advice you need in order to be able to solve these problems so that you don't have the misconfigured pivot tables that you may be experiencing today. Thanks for watching this episode of Using Monkey Tools. To get your own monkey, visit our website at monkeytools.ca. Or if you subscribe to SkillWave's Self-Service Business Intelligence Academy, you'll get a free annual pro license included with your subscription. And remember, Monkey Tools was developed to support better Excel and Power BI solutions. If you want to learn how to really master these tools, you should definitely check out our full course catalog at skillwave.training.